Hi, today we will discuss about Kubernetes service object. So this Kubernetes service is used for exposing the application within the cluster or outside the cluster. There are four types of Kubernetes services like cluster IP, node port, load balancer, and external name. And the purpose of each service is different. Like cluster IP is used for exposing the application within the cluster. Let's say for example, I have a database pods that are running in my Kubernetes cluster, and also I have my front-end application pods that are running in my same Kubernetes cluster. And in this case, my front-end application pods needs to access the database application pods. In this case, what I can do, I can create cluster IP service for the database application pods that are running in my same Kubernetes cluster and expose that application within the same cluster so that my front-end pods can access the service type to communicate with the database. So similar kind of use cases we can use this cluster IP. The second one is node port. The node port is technically used for exposing the application outside the cluster. Like we can expose the application publicly, but based on node static IP, like the worker node static IP, also on the node specific port. And the third one is load balancer. The load balancer again it is used for exposing the application outside the cluster, same as node port, but Kubernetes natively does not support any HA proxy. Instead, we can use the cloud provider services like AWS load balancer or Azure load balancer or GCP load balancer. So we can, with the help of these cloud provider load balancers, we can use this service type. And the final one is external name. The external name is used for exposing the application outside the cluster, but instead of a load balancer, we can directly map our application to a domain name. So it will resolve the DNS. Let's say, for example, I have some test.com and I want to map my application to the test.com. I can use this external name as a service type. So that is how it works. Now let's get into the demo. I'm in my code editor. Let me go to Kubernetes services documentation and take an example from official documentation. So before we take an example, I want to show you the service types. Okay, as you can see here, cluster IP used for exposing the application within the cluster. Similar to that, like we have other service types like node port, load balancer, and external name. So let's take a look at the examples for cluster IP and node port. And similar to these two service types, these other two services can be created. So I'll go to the documentation. Okay. So this has the example for creating the pod as well as the service. So let's copy this far, this one, and I'll go to my code editor. Let me create a file service cluster ip.yml. Okay, I'll save it. Let me walk you through this YAML definition. So here what we are doing, we are creating a pod. The name of the pod is nginx, and this matters labels. So the label we are assigning is app.kubernetes.io/name proxy. So this should be same as the selector label that we are providing in the service object, because whatever the pods that are having the label that we provided in the selector is so that like the service will expose the application that are running in the pod. So this can also be a group of pods that are created by deployments or the stateful sets. Now if say for example 10 pods are having the same label, and the service will expose the application that are running in those 10 pods which are matching these labels. Now what we are doing in this part, we are simply running nginx container. It will run my web application that runs on port 80. Now service, and this service is basically what it does, it will try to match the label of the pods. Since the label is same here and here, it will expose the application that is running in this pod. Now ports, since it is a web server, it works on port 80, protocol is TCP, and name of the port that we can provide anything. And here also name of the port we have provided like HTTP web SVC. So target port is something that our container port. Here you can see the name here and here same, which means the container will listen on this port. Now let me save it. I'll go back to my terminal and create the service and pod. This one kubectl apply -f, this one. So pod is created and then service is created. So if I do kubectl get pods, I can see one pod is running. Similar to that kubectl get svc, we can see this. If not svc, we can also provide service. So both commands will work. Now, as you can see, cluster IP, the application is exposed within the cluster on this IP. Similar to that, like we can create the node port. So for example, like I want to access this Nginx application. What I can do, if I have other pods that are running in the same Kubernetes cluster, and I can simply hit this cluster IP from those pods on port 80, then my application will be accessible from other pods. Now let's try to create the other service type, which is node port. Let me search for node port. Okay, we have this one. I will take an example of this service type, which is the type of node port. I'll copy, go to this code editor, service node port.yml. Okay, I'll save it. And we need a pod for this example because the service has to expose the application running in one of the pod. So since I don't have anything, I have taken example from the existing cluster IP pod, but I'll take some changes to it. So the selector label should be same as this one. So I'm changing it, and name of the pod, I'll give node port. Here also let's give the container name node port. Fine. What else we have? We have everything. Let me walk you through this YAML definition. It's same as the cluster IP. The only difference is we have type node port. And in this example, we have not defined any service type, because by default, if we don't provide any service type, it will take cluster IP as the default one. Or we can even provide the type cluster IP. Both will work. But in this case, node port is not the default one. Hence, we are defining the type of the service in the specs of the service. So what it does, this is my port and target port, again the container port, node port. So what it does, it will expose the application outside the cluster on port 3007. Say for example, my worker node IP is this one, 192.5.1.3. Along with that, I can provide my port because this is the port on which my application is exposed. If I hit this, I'll be able to access my application that is running on the pods. So this is how the application can be exposed outside the cluster on these node ports on the node static IPs. So I will save it. I'll go back to my terminal and create the service and pod kubectl apply -f service node pod.yml. So again, pod and service is created. If we do kubectl get pods, I got this one running, and kubectl svc, sorry, get svc. If we got my service, as you can see here, our service name is my service, which is the type of node port, and worker node port is this one on which it is exposed, and exposed on port 3007 on TCP protocol. So that is how it works. Similar to that, like we can even create other two service types. That's all for this session. Thanks for watching.